Heaven sent.
As a self-proclaimed nostalgia junkie, I often find myself reminiscing on a time in which the world just felt different. The music was immaculate, local shopping malls were the stomping grounds for after-school hangouts, and not to mention, technology had found itself at a happy medium. Without a heavy presence of smartphones, social media, or even high-speed internet, people would spend a lot more of their time socializing, and even gaming itself had become a very in-person tradition. But without going too far off the rails into the depths of nostalgia, there was also a very prominent vibe at this time. With the resurgence of the Y2K era being so popular in modern times, I've been seeing a lot of creators beginning their deep dives into this particular vibe in question, that being the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era was something of a phenomenon in the early 2000s, with movies, fashion, music, and even video games all sporting a certain edge to them. Whether it was highly offensive content, exaggerated art styles, or just a big middle finger in the face of anyone that opposed, it was like a whole new era of punk rock. But this time around, it was being pushed into the mainstream media. They took notice of how contagious this newfound Attitude Era was for the youth, and were eager to push their profanity-spewing propaganda to any bleached-haired 12-year-old within a 1,000-mile radius. And as a former G-Unit chain holder, as well as survivor of this incredible era, I thought I would make this video recounting some of the most memorable releases of that time. But for the sake of keeping this chaotic time period somewhat organized, I decided to split this list into 3 different categories: extreme, obscene, and suck on this. So if you're anything like me and always down for a Mountain Dew spilling journey back into the early 2000s, let's put on our puffy skate shoes and get ready to haul ass as we dive into the Attitude Era of gaming.
Hi, I'm Johnny Knoxville, and this is the Cub Test.
When journeying back to the roots of our topic of discussion, MTV had a huge part in escalating the Attitude Era movement. From the antics of controversial artists such as Eminem and Marilyn Manson, to the obscene amount of reality TV on broadcast, MTV was loaded with everything you could ever ask for in terms of crude subject matter. But with the introduction of the Jackass series, MTV had officially become the stomping grounds for edgelords around the world. And if you ever told me that I was going to be watching grown men giving each other nut taps and huffing each other's farts on cable television, I'd probably call you crazy. But luckily for 10-year-old me, I was just in time to bear witness to American television at its finest. And with such a high demand for content of its nature, Jackass was a knockout hit, almost instantly. Ratings were high, the show was a massive success, and emergency rooms across the globe just couldn't keep up with all the amateur stuntmen this show began to spawn. The entire world was in awe at the shocking and outright stupidity of the Jackass crew, but much like a speeding train colliding with a nursing home, you just couldn't look away. So what better way to cash in on the success of the Jackass series than by creating a video game about it? Well, they did just that, but was it just as good as the show? That depends on how you look at it. Beginning with the game's narrative, the plot begins with the series director, Jeff Tremaine, severely injuring his manberries, so much so that it's now up for you to direct the upcoming season. Each chapter of the game is presented in episodes, with each episode giving you a selection of stunts to choose from, all with their own set of unique goals. The more goals you achieve in your stunt, the more revenue you take in. The more money, the higher your ratings, ensuring that the Jackass series will continue to live on. Now I'm sure you're all wondering as to what kind of stunts you'll be pulling in your playthrough, as sniffing butts isn't the most stimulating of activities for a video game. Well, they basically take an inspiration from a good bit of different stunts that were performed in the show, and ramp them up to an outrageous degree. So much so that you'll be practically murdering your castmates in every film session. From human pachinko, skyscraper chicken fights, to explosive golf, the majority of the stunts play out like your typical party game, with a lot of the minigames being reminiscent of something you would play in a Mario Party. The typical toilet humor and personality from the TV show is in full swing, but due to the game's somewhat awkward presentation, it doesn't carry over too well in virtual form. A lot of the voice acting is poorly recorded, and even the animations can be downright weird at times. But it's obvious they weren't looking to win any awards or anything with this type of game. It felt more so like a nod to the fans of the series, and in that respect, I think they did a pretty good job. I found myself having a really good time in revisiting this game after many years, but couldn't help but to remember how much more fun it is to enjoy with your friends. Which, I guess the same could be said in watching the show. While the Jackass series was incredibly crude and sometimes vomit-inducing, it's one of those shows that truly defined an era of pure mayhem, and for me personally, was a staple for my childhood friends and I. There was an amazing sense of camaraderie among this large group of village idiots, and the Jackass game is yet another example of its influence on the early 2000s culture. But while there's plenty of bone-crunching debauchery to be had in this game, the next title on our list will make Jackass look like a walk in the park. So strap up your cleats and get ready to hit the gridiron. We're about to join the league. The world of sports and gaming have been hand in hand ever since the very beginning. From the tennis simulating prowess of Pong to the arcade classic of NBA Jam. No matter what generation you are from, I'm willing to bet you've spent some time playing a sports game. But in terms of a sport that really gets the testosterone boiling and jock itch flaring, is the great American pastime of football. And as far as football games go, there's an overwhelming amount of good ones. But for your average gamer, certain football simulators can seem a bit too daunting. But that's where the Blitz series came into play. The very first Blitz title was released in the arcades in November of 1997. With such widespread acclaim and rise to popularity, Midway Games decided it wouldn't be such a bad idea to port the game over to home console, as it was a digestible version of football that just about anyone could pick up and play. And because of this, pretty much everyone was playing it. It took the fundamentals of football and added a stylish flair, taking away the troublesome penalties and typical rules of the sport and switching them out for boosts and special moves. This made the game a hell of a lot more simple to play than your typical sports simulator, and was mindless, carefree fun. The Blitz series was finding great success right out of the gate, unleashing a slew of yearly sequels, but their days were soon numbered. With the Madden franchise taking the market by storm in passing years, Blitz was beginning to fall behind. And with EA being the greedy sons of bitches that they are, they weren't going to let just anyone hang on to the NFL license for much longer. With EA eventually gaining exclusive licensing for the NFL name, the Blitz series found it was time for a Hail Mary, deciding to take the formula of the original Blitz and wrap it up in a middle finger shaped package, which came to be in the form of Blitz the League. This game was pretty much everything you would expect from a pissed off developer, and it was that very energy that made this game so damn good. Because of their newfound issue in losing the licensing, the league makes use of a totally fictional roster of different teams, with the ability to create your own in the campaign mode. And rather than sticking to the traditional formula of a franchise mode, the story in Blitz the League is one that is filled with pure mayhem. It begins with our star quarterback being injured in a final game, leading to the owner of said team developing plans to clean house and rebrand the organization. But in order to do so, he's going to need the help of some hard-working taxpayers' money to make this team as great as they can be. He cuts a deal with the town's mayor that if his team can win the championship, they will have to aid in funding the new stadium. If they lose though, he will make a large donation to our upcoming re-election fund. The deal is set, and so begins the time for us to create this new team. We begin by picking its name, logo, and even uniform design. We're also given the opportunity to customize the coaching staff and adjust the offense and defense as you see fit. It's not as in-depth as some of the earlier Madden or NCAA titles, but it's a nice streamlined way to customize your playmaking. We then get a choice between 2 starting stadiums, and after that, we're off to the races. And just when you think you're playing a normal football game, the madness begins. So what makes it so different? Well, for starters, the Clash Meter. This mechanic is somewhat like the Game Breaker mechanic found in the EA Street series, meaning that making successful plays or defensive stops will reward you with Clash points, which allows you to slow down time for easy completions, perform special jukes or stiff arms, and even injure your opponents with a dirty hit. A violent tackle that is used to lower their stamina and even cause them serious harm. Oof, that's gotta hurt. Now if you find yourself on the receiving end of such a violent attack, have no fear, because in the league, performance-enhancing drugs are more than welcome on the field, as you'll be given the choice to either treat your players with medical attention, or giving them a shot of crank and sending them limping back onto the field. And as far as the variety of drugs goes, there's enough here to supply a local pharmacy. But going back to the gameplay, it plays very similar to the classic Blitz formula, but this time around feels like a more pissed off version. The camera will cut to some hilarious mid-game trash talk between plays, and really sells the pure attitude that drives this game's overall feel.
This ain't no ballet, motherfucker! This is for real! Come on!
The Clash Meter is a great mechanic in completing tough passes or runs, and upon filling said meter, you'll be rewarded with an Unleash move, an unstoppable play that can really come in handy for clutch situations. Other than your typical football gameplay, the story mode is filled with more than enough debauchery to sit alongside an Aaron Hernandez docu-series, with prison games, unlockable cheerleading galleries, and plenty more hijinks to satiate your thirst for edgy 2000s creativity. It's not for everyone, but for a guy like me who loves this sort of content, I find it to be a beautiful part of sports gaming history. It really encapsulates everything the Attitude Era stood for in its time, and was a middle finger in the face of all who opposed the Blitz series. But much like the previous game on our list, our next game is one that specializes in shock value. With extreme violence and toilet humor being a steady trend in this category, how about we move on to our next topic of Celebrity Deathmatch.
It looks so real.
Have you ever wondered what it'd be like to watch Marilyn Manson drag Lance Bass into the seedy depths of hell? Or how about a front seat view to Mr. T giving Busta Rhymes an off-the-cuff lobotomy? If so, then boy do I have the game for you. As we had previously mentioned, MTV was a hotbed for edgy content in the early 2000s. Along with these trends spawned the memorable variety of satirical cartoons and animated parodies, often regarded as adult cartoons. These animated series were all meant to be viewed by a mature audience, and would often poke fun at real-life events. This type of comedy had become incredibly popular with teens and young adults at the time, and with shock value being so profitable for many cable networks, what better way to shock and humor your audience than by creating a show in which celebrities tear each other limb for limb? Celebrity Deathmatch was the result of these far-out concepts. With little to no restraint, they aimed to shock the world in ways an animated show had never done before. But we're not here to discuss this program in full detail by any means, as its demon spawn of a video game is going to be our next topic. But with the foundation for raunchy humor and hilarious combat being so perfectly laid out in the TV show, it's no sweat that the game would be equally as entertaining, right? Not exactly. Let's begin with the roster of characters. The game features 21 different celebrities in which you can fight to the death, including familiar faces such as Jerry Springer, Dennis Rodman, or Carmen Electra, which as you can tell, the 90s were really showing face in this game's lineup, as well as a few different creature feature characters like the Mummy being thrown in for good measure. There are two different modes to play through, one being episode mode and the other a selection of quick modes and matches to create. But even that sad little variety isn't enough to change any of this game's mediocre formula. The gameplay is simple. You'll spend your time mashing one or two buttons, filling up your special move meter, and pressing it for an equally mediocre viewing experience. Wow, so exciting. With the only thing keeping the matches interesting being a variety of random objects and power-ups for torturing your opponent. I mean, watching Ron Jeremy take a missile to the face from Anna Nicole Smith is something you won't see every day. But with a less than inspired selection of moves and brain-dead AI, the game just turns out to be a gory snooze fest. Your first few matches or so will seem pretty entertaining, with the usual commentators making their off-color remarks and funny one-liners. This quickly becomes repetitive, often resulting in the same jokes being thrown at you over and over again.
This fight just got as ugly as my sister.
If I had to give praise to anything, it would be the visuals, as the claymation style of the show really carried over well to console. Celebrity Deathmatch was without a doubt a massive part of what made this era so memorable for edgy content. But the game showed that it was much better to be viewed rather than played, which is probably why it wasn't very well received with critics, either. But that's not to say it didn't deserve a spot in this video, because if Celebrity Deathmatch is good at one thing, it's being extreme. But anywho, that's only the first of 3 categories we're looking to explore from this fine era. So next on our roster, get ready to rest your thumb on the return the channel button, and make sure you've locked the door. Things are about to get a bit more spicy.
Warning, this video contains explicit material not suitable for children. If you think Girls Gone Wild was wild before, just wait till you see what these girls do when Snoop Dogg is unleashed and takes control of the camera. It's not sold in stores and can't be shown on TV, so call now and get the all-new Girls Gone Wild doggy style.
The struggles of being a hormone-riddled teen have been the subject of many hilarious comedy films, with the phenomenon of teen comedy. While they didn't have the most intellectual plots or even the greatest acting, they all did a great job in poking fun at the hilarity of our golden years and in being relatable to the struggles of early manhood. So for game developers to take this formula and turn it into a game probably wouldn't be a half bad idea. The concept eventually came to be with a sequel to a series that began well into the late 80s by the name of Leisure Suit Larry. A series that was driven by an unsuccessful pickup artist named Larry Laffer, a man with an affinity for young women and double entendres, following in his quest to become the ladies' man he's always dreamed of. The game was a pretty fresh concept for its time, as you would attempt to smooth talk your way into the sack with a wide variety of different prospects. It was more of an interactive novel in its early days, primarily focusing on the comedy aspects of its narrative, with a few spicy inclusions for those looking to get cheeky. And with the game and its sequels faring well among players and critics alike, the time came for the series to progress into the next level and hang some serious dong into the next generation of consoles.
Wait a second. You're not Jewish?
Well, no. Is that a problem?
This evolution came in the form of Leisure Suit Larry, magna cum laude, and was released on October 5th, 2004. In this game, you play Larry Lovage, the younger nephew of the former game's protagonist, as he traverses the treacherous battlefield of community college, teeming with buxom polygons and copious flatulence. The plot is simple. Larry is promised a spot on a local dating TV show called Swingles, if he can collect enough tokens of affection from the ladies on campus. Hopeful of making his Uncle Larry proud and losing his V-card, we set off on our journey to woo the many women on campus and earn our keep on the upcoming Swingles episode. In doing so, you'll find yourself completing a wide variety of different minigames, successfully chatting up potential suitors, and of course, pounding gallons of alcohol in order to attain that liquid courage. But you've got to remember, our boy Larry isn't the most smooth operator, and he's going to need your help if there's any chance of him completing his mission. Each time you complete a minigame, you build Larry's confidence, as well as being rewarded with money in which you can use to enhance your style and pay for certain minigames of wooing your dates. It's basically college dating 101, doing stupid jobs to earn stupid money and saying stupid things while wearing your stupid shirt. And while some of the minigames are completely infuriating, what makes this game so hilarious is the ridiculous chatting feature. Whenever you engage in conversation, you'll take control of a little sperm cell, in which you must properly guide through certain objects in order to say the right thing in your convo. While it may look as though you only want to hit the green notes, sometimes a wildcard answer will be thrown into the mix, which can win you some extra points in correctly steering the conversation. But when this goes bad, it often results in Larry having some hilarious responses.
Oh, this is so exciting. What else?
Kenny Rogers has 2 butts. Yeah, 2 butts. It's a birth defect.
These conversations usually lead to more minigames being played, all with the intent of bringing them back to your smelly room and hopefully getting lucky for the very first time. But if you're unable to get your hands on the uncut version, I'm sad to tell you pixel pervs out there, you won't be seeing much of anything. And honestly, as stupid as this game should be, it's definitely a great way to spend an afternoon. That is, if you're into this sort of thing. If you're a fan of early 2000s teen comedy slop, then you're sure to get a kick out of Magna Cum Laude. And as with most of the edgy titles of this era, it's really surprising that it actually made its way on the store shelves at one point. But the Attitude Era was a much different time, comprised of lower standards and setting boundaries for their X-rated experiences. And while Magna Cum Laude was about as obscene as they come in terms of dialogue, the next game on our list is something of an iconic feat for loot gaming. So leave your skivvies at home as we're going commando in BMX XXX.
Local girls who are up for anything.
It's where local girls go wild.
And you can try it now for free.
You can listen to messages, exchange messages, and if you want, go private for one-to-one conversations
with a real girl,
not a paid operator. Make a new friend on the other end. Call now.
Call now.
Call now.
Go wild and try it free. 1-800-WILD-320. UC Media 18+.
Much like the popularity of raunchy comedies and music of the Attitude Era, extreme sports were also a massive success in both mainstream media and the video game industry. With the 1999 release of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater becoming one of the most successful games of the PS1, it was a no-brainer that the market would be flooded with many different titles covering the beloved culture of extreme sports. If you've seen my video covering this topic, then you'll probably remember me going into detail about this time period. But in the vein of keeping things condensed, the presence of extreme sports culture was felt in almost everything, from fashion, music, and even movies. Everybody wanted to either be a part of the action, or at the very least, represent for those that were. And given the fact that extreme sports such as BMX were so marketable at this time, why not combine the likes of a BMX game with the early 2000s raunchiness of a teen comedy? Also, throw in some tatas for good measure, and you've got a recipe for BMX XXX. A game that probably never should have happened, and depending on what type of gamer you are, it's hard to say whether or not it was actually a good game. It plays very similar to the great BMX games of the Dave Mirra series. It was actually supposed to be a continuation of that exact IP, but due to the game being deemed as heavily offensive by many, Dave Mirra was less than keen on having his name tied to such a monstrosity. So Acclaim Entertainment had to take their efforts back to the drawing board and create a Dave Mirra game without Dave Mirra. Interesting. The premise of BMX XXX is simple. There is no premise. You pick your character and begin your journey throughout a variety of different levels, completing a multitude of challenges. You're also given the opportunity of side challenges that unlock special, dirty videos to feast your eyes upon. For research purposes, I viewed all of them, and let me tell you, if you're a fan of silicone, then you'll love this game. While the nudity and lewd videos are more of a novelty than anything, let's discuss more about the gameplay, as it really isn't all too bad in that department. The wide roster of different tricks and combos leave plenty to work with in terms of variety and style. Not to mention, you can also modify most of your tricks, opening up an even wider selection of stylish moves to get acquainted with. It plays much like you would expect it to, given the fact that it's essentially another installment in the Dave Mirra series, but the missions and challenges this time around are much more bizarre. From relieving constipated construction workers, hitting the streets with your neighborhood pimp, to helping your local firemen stand at attention.
Damn it! I can't get it up! You know what I mean.
You'll find yourself pretty clueless on what to expect next. Sure, I was expecting to attend a few comps and maybe even beat a couple of high scores, but delivering diapered monkeys to a hippie protester sounds more like a Grateful Dead concert. Now, while I do personally enjoy this game, primarily for nostalgia reasons, that's not to say it should be a staple in everyone's gaming collection, as there's just as much to complain about as there is to praise. Starting with the visuals. 2002 wasn't the most advanced year for gaming, but in comparison to other titles of the same year such as Metroid Prime, Splinter Cell, even Grand Theft Auto Vice City, BMX XXX is greatly lacking in its presentation. Not only do the character models look outdated, but you're pushing in-game nudity as a selling point and giving us this? It's laughable at best. Also, while some of the challenges are pretty fun and hilarious to take part in, the vast majority of them get incredibly repetitive, and the same can be said for the level selection. Most of these levels feel like they were either copied or inspired by the Tony Hawk series, and while I can understand their inspo, it just doesn't bring anything fresh to the table. Now it's pretty obvious that a title as gimmicky and obscene as this one is pretty much doomed from the beginning, but that's not to say it didn't fare well with its demographic. While the majority of critics ripped the game to shreds, it still found a place for those who appreciate its lowbrow humor. And much like we had talked about Blitz the League being a middle finger to the face of the NFL, BMX XXX kinda felt like a middle finger to the industry. The fact that they create a game so mindlessly obscene out of an E-rated franchise is pretty bold, and while it wasn't great for their sales or future endeavors, it at least became an interesting part of gaming history. So if you're an immature gamer with an affinity for butt rock songs like myself, I think you'll find yourself right at home with this one. Just make sure to keep your curtains closed. This is one of those games you don't want to be caught playing.
Punky pie, do I look fat in these?
When thinking back on what it was like to grow up as a young man in the late 90s, I'm sure many of my fellow old heads can remember their very first look at one of these bad boys. You see, before the internet had began infecting our brains with an overpopulace of dirty imagery, we had to ease our hormones by breaking into Dad's Lucky Tackle box and sneaking a few Playboy issues from his stash. My point being, Playboy and the man behind the brand, Hugh Hefner, played a major role in the later half of the 20th century. From TV shows, guest appearances, and extravagant parties, Mr. Hefner was doing it all, and living a lifestyle that many were in amazement at. With multiple generations living in pure jealousy at the thought of sharing a mansion with an army of scantily clad ladies, the developers at Cyberlore Studios were hoping to make this dream become a reality. In the 2005 release of Playboy: The Mansion, a simulation game that aimed to put you in the shoes of Mr. Hefner himself as you rebuild the Playboy empire from the ground up and begin living your wildest dreams. That is, if your wildest dreams are having repetitive convos or picking out office furniture. Yeah. Now, to say that this game was inspired by The Sims would be a bit of an understatement. It's basically the foundation of every Sims game to a T. You form relationships with other NPCs, speak in gibberish, and eventually make them get naked in weird places. But the problem with that formula in this game is that it wears out its welcome within the first hour. The premise is simple. You're building an empire based on magazines, so that means you'll be overseeing everything that comes with making a great issue for your audience. That means getting photographers, finding models, interviewing celebrities, and of course, getting people to take their clothes off. In doing so, you'll be tasked with picking which parts of the magazine you'd like to include for your issue, and once it's all lined up, you'll be ready to hit the presses and churn a profit. As you can imagine, your brand will begin to grow over time, meaning you can expand the mansion, bring in more popular guests, and throw wild parties in hopes of gaining more exclusive content for your magazine. And as fun as this can be in the beginning, you'll soon come to find that it's basically the same 5 steps that you'll be repeating for each issue. But that can't be all there is to do in the game, right? I mean, you're playing as Hugh Hefner. Well, there is a fair bit of socializing you can do with your guests and playmates, even forming romantic relationships with them. But it doesn't mean all too much when the local football star can just swoop in and violate your girl on the couch right in front of you. I really thought we had something special. Anyways, the game was obviously just a gimmicky cash grab, using copious chest fat as a means to sell copies. But I'm sad to say, the only tatas in this game are poorly rendered polygonal travesties. It's about all this game has to offer. It's dull, uninspired, and worst of all, it's quite tame for a game based on one of the most popular adult brands of all time. So in the world of obscene titles, Playboy: The Mansion is hardly worth mentioning, but its presence has always piqued my interest, so I thought I'd give it a spin for this video. But much like the extreme selections for our previous category, our observations of the obscene will be moving on to our next topic, as we've got one more category in which I'd like to dive into. So for all my Limp Bizkit loving Jenko wearing souls from the early 2000s, this next list is for the games comprised of wonderful edge and in-your-face style, with the Attitude Era's best of Suck on This. Kicking things off into our next category, comprised of more attitude than Shawn Michaels as a line cook, these next 3 games were best known for their witty dialogue, over-the-top action, and best of all, sticking it to the man. And with this next title being one of the most creative games I can recall, it just goes to show how beautiful the 6th generation of gaming truly was. While Viewtiful Joe is considered to be much more family friendly than the majority of other games on this list, I still think it makes a great fit for everything the Attitude Era stood for. From its B-movie style one-liners, suggestive humor and stylish combat, Viewtiful Joe is the epitome of balls to the wall beat 'em up gaming at its finest, and is everything you could ever ask for in a game of its time. Not to mention, Joe's got a little bit of a Fred Durst vibe going on. Beginning with the game's narrative, we find ourselves at the movies with Joe and his girlfriend, as they're viewing a battle between a middle-aged superhero with a beer gut and a giant monster. The monster defeats Super Blue the Beer Gut Warrior, allowing him to reach into the real world and grab a hold of Joe's girlfriend, Sylvia. Which at that point, Joe is also taken in the movie by Super Blue's giant mech, at which he is then promptly chosen to defeat the monster with the help of Super Blue's guidance. And with a flick of the wrist on his brand new V-Watch, our average Joe takes on the role of Viewtiful Joe, and even comes up with his own catchphrase.
Head to the go-go, baby!
Now the gameplay in Viewtiful Joe is something quite special, as it's a wonderful blend of beat 'em up as well as platforming. A formula that ensures each level is met with a steady pacing, and offers up plenty of action to keep the gameplay exciting. One of its best features is in its visual effects meter, a mechanic that allows you to manipulate time, as well as zoom in for more accurate blows and special moves. This mechanic is a huge part of the gameplay, and as much as you'll find yourself using it, it just never seems to get old. You can use it to dodge missiles, land tricky punches, and even hit a jackpot at the local casino. It not only makes the combat fun as hell, but it's also used to defeat certain boss battles or complete puzzles within a level. The combat system itself is pretty simple to pick up on, but really begins to flesh out as you upgrade Joe with a variety of new moves, giving you the ability to string together some incredibly satisfying combos, especially with the combined use of the special effects meter. But just because Viewtiful Joe is quite simple to pick up at first glance, that's not to say that it doesn't carry a humbling level of difficulty. The boss battles are especially punishing, and will often require multiple attempts in completing them. But the level of difficulty isn't so much frustrating as it is rewarding, and even when I found myself running out of lives and having to start the level over from scratch, I really didn't mind in doing so. It's both a rewarding and charming example of what 6th generation gaming was made of in this glorious era. And with a game as attitude-soaked as Viewtiful Joe, you'll definitely be growing out the goatee after giving this one a playthrough. Not to mention, you can also unlock Dante from Devil May Cry as a secondary character. What could possibly be more badass than that? So if you've somehow missed out on the opportunity to experience this game, here's one more reason to no longer deprive yourself from its greatness. But as far as following up on the greatness of the Viewtiful Joe series, this next franchise is less than savory in terms of critical appeal. But that's not to say it doesn't fit snugly into the contents of this category. So without further ado, join me as we indulge ourselves in the tasteless world of the Outlaw series. So far in this video, we've covered a pretty wide range of different titles, all with a shared appreciation for all things edgy and cool. But at what point do the fart jokes and bouncy bosoms become less of an aesthetic and more of a gimmick? And with that, the Outlaw series is here to say, who the f cares? Taking over your family sporting event with a hefty dose of lowbrow humor and over-the-top jiggle physics, the Outlaw IP is one that spans across 8 different titles of the 6th generation of consoles, and wreaks absolute mayhem in the realms of tennis, golf, and volleyball. But beginning with Outlaw Golf, arguably the most popular of the series, it plays much like your typical golf game. You're given the choice of exhibition matches, multiplayer, or even the campaign-like tour mode. But where Outlaw Golf separates itself from the pack is in its over-the-top personality. From committing assault on your caddy, to viewing some promiscuous girl-on-girl action that Tiger Woods himself would definitely approve of, this game really takes pride in how ridiculous it is. Despite these gimmicky attributes, it's still one hell of a good time. There are plenty of unlockables to work towards with a charismatic variety of characters, as well as a broad range of different courses to unleash your A-game on. Depending on how well you do will affect the composure of your character. Put a good game and you'll become sharper with each successful swing. But catch yourself in a few too many sand traps and you'll be punching and screaming in no time. The loss of composure also affects your player's overall performance, which makes for a pretty interesting mechanic. Now moving on to the other games of the Outlaw series, volleyball and tennis, it's much of the same formula, featuring a returning cast of characters as well as some new faces being thrown into the mix. Each game carries a wonderful soundtrack of early 2000s bangers, setting the vibe for the intense competition presented in the gameplay. And when I say these games are difficult, I mean it, as I was literally getting smoked in each one of them, even on the easiest settings. They make use of little charismatic cutscenes in between plays to showcase the personality of the characters. And while it does produce some laughs initially, sometimes I found myself being totally annoyed by it. Overall, the Outlaw series in general does nothing special in terms of gameplay, but rather it's an edgier take on some of America's favorite pastimes. Plus, they had a pretty solid run of blockbuster exclusives, which is something that tickles my nostalgia bean way more than it probably should. So if you want to play golf, volleyball, and/or tennis, but you're in love with your cousin in Busch Light, then I think you'll fit right at home with the Outlaw series. But for our third and final game of this category, I figure we dive into one of my favorite PS2 classics from back in the day. And for my fellow edgelords out there, it's one you definitely won't want to miss. So get ready to lose your sanity in the best way possible in Twisted Metal Black. Taking the final spot in our compilation of chaos is an installment of a series that I happen to go way back with. Twisted Metal was one of my very first games I'd ever owned as a child. It came to be a franchise I was utterly obsessed with. Not only was the gameplay filled with everything a growing boy could ever want, but the characters and lore within the Twisted Metal universe were always what made this series stand out to me. And while the story itself was always one of carnage and destruction, it wasn't until its debut on the PS2 that we saw Twisted Metal in its darkest light. Twisted Metal Black was released on June 18, 2001, and was aiming to both shock and excite its player base with a twisted tale of murder, revenge, and plenty of firepower. The game itself was a fine-tuned upgrade from its predecessor, boasting smoother controls and double the frame rate. A familiar cast of characters from throughout the series make their welcome return. With an emphasis on exploring these characters and their backstories, you were sure to encounter plenty of nightmare fuel as you played through each character's story. The narrative begins simple enough, with each character being held in an asylum for a variety of different mental disorders. Our old pal Calypso is on the hunt for prospects in his beloved blood sport of vehicular combat, and decides to come looking in the direction of this asylum for potential candidates. And depending on whichever character you pick, you'll learn more of that character's backstory and as to why they wish to win Calypso's prize. For some it's revenge, for others it's love, but no matter what the reason may be, they all have one goal in common, and that's achieving their goal by any means necessary. And if that means strapping homing missiles to a big rig and sending your opponents into the dirt, so be it. Now the reason I include this game in our list is because of how unapologetic it is in being as edgy as possible. From vomit-inducing backstories, excessive violence, and even the game's overall atmosphere, every inch of Twisted Metal Black is soaked in grime, but it's done so in a way that you can't help but to find yourself being captivated by its appeal. Not to mention, if just one look at Crazy 8's face isn't enough to keep you up at night, I don't know what is. It's hard to say what the team at Insomniac Games were thinking when it came down to the game's creation, but if they were looking to both appease their fan base and also shock the world of gaming, I think they did a pretty bang-up job. Twisted Metal Black is a glorious addition to the PS2's excellent catalog of exclusives, and is a game that was unapologetic in its raw execution. But just as the Twisted Metal franchise has seemingly come to an end in present time, so must this video. I've got to get ready for my next big project that I can't wait to show you guys. So for now, thanks to every single one of you who have been supporting the channel, and continue to do so by leaving a comment or liking my content. I'm in the weeds of a busy season at work, but our next video will be well worth the wait for any of those interested in some Yuletide nostalgia. But anyways, my name is Vincent. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Peace out, guys.